Uh, Thank you. I'm just going to show you some pictures of my center in Pittsburgh, so there's no prepared speech. I've discovered that people forget prepared speeches about 10 minutes after they're done, but they do remember pictures. So the good news, guys, is it's all pictures. So relax. This isn't too painful. And it is my life story. I was in my whole 65 years is actually 6 city blocks. I was born in the neighborhood where I work now, and will probably die in that neighborhood. So my whole life story is 6 blocks. And part of the reason I've stayed there, I wanted the kids in my neighborhood to know that you don't have to go to the world, you can bring the world to your neighborhood. And just because you grew up poor, as I did, does not mean that you have to end up that way. It's not so much where you start, but where you finish that matters. So I wanted kids in my neighborhood, and adults, to know that you could do extraordinary things, you could stay and improve your neighborhood, and you could have a pretty good life at the same time. So this whole story is because of one public school teacher, a guy named Frank Ross, who actually saved my life. I was flunking out of school academically, and Mr. Ross was our art teacher, and he showed me how to make a big ceramic vessel one day, and I fell in love with it. So for the remaining 2 years of high school, I cut all my classes, and I went to the art room. But I was smart enough to give the teachers whose classes I was cutting the pottery I made, and they gave me passing grades, and that's how I got out of the place. And Frank says, "You're too smart to die. You're going to college." So he kept hounding me until I filled out an application to the University of Pittsburgh, which I wrote out in pencil. And I sent this thing in mainly to get him off my back. And then they sent me this piece of paper that says you have to pass something called the Scholastic Aptitude Test. I'd never seen the test, so I marked up the test and I flunked the test. So I get into Pitt as a probationary student. Well, I graduated from Pitt with honors. Now I'm a trustee of the University of Pittsburgh. I actually sit on the board of the school that let me in on probation. And I was the commencement speaker in front of 13,000 people. And I got up and said, "Don't give up on the poor kids. I might end up being the commencement speaker." And that story is what I'm going to talk about for a few minutes. People are born into the world as assets, not liabilities. It's all in the way that you treat people that drives behavior. If Mr. Ross had not seen that in spite of my academics, I had leadership ability, I'm another black kid who's shot down in the streets or in the penitentiary. But fortunately, that didn't happen to me. So what I've decided to do with my whole life is to do 2 things. Run something called Bidwell Training Center, which is a vocational school. And I took over Bidwell in 1972, probably before most of you guys were even born. And it was in an old warehouse with holes in the floor and holes in the roof, and I took over Bidwell. The front door was hanging on a hinge when I showed up. And the kids were on their knees gambling at the front door. And at the end of the first day, I said to the secretary, when I showed up here at Bidwell today, the kids were on their knees gambling at the front door. I didn't recognize the game they were playing. She said, "Oh, they were taking bets on how long you'd last in the job." So that was Bidwell. My first official act is I bought the beer and I bought the paint. And I said, "Anybody that doesn't show up to paint this building is fired." And one guy didn't show up and I fired him. I said, "We're going to do this. We're going to do it right." And it starts today with this paintbrush. Manchester is the arts program I founded during the riots to work with these kids in the streets, just like Mr. Ross had done with me in his classroom, because I figured out there wasn't anything wrong with the kids, that clay and affection and good food couldn't cure. So I've built my whole life around the Bidwell Training Center and the Manchester Craftsmen's Guild, and I'm going to show you some pictures of this school I built. Now, Mr. Ross took us to see a very famous house that a man named Frank Lloyd Wright built. Have you ever heard of him? He did pretty good in the architecture business. And Mr. Ross took us to see a very famous house called Falling Water that Frank Lloyd Wright built. So here I am, this 16-year-old kid, and you get down through the woods and you come out into this fabulous clearing, and there's this beautiful house sits up on a rock with a creek running right down through the middle of the house. And I looked at that and I said, in my neighborhood, we spend time trying to keep the water out of the house. This guy's got a creek running right down through the middle of the place. That's an interesting way of looking at water. The other thing that really fascinated me was the light that enveloped the house. And I said, if I could get that light into my neighborhood, I'm halfway home. So I committed myself to building a Frank Lloyd Wright building before I left the planet, and I did. I'm going to show it to you, because I hired one of his students to build this center. The whole theory is the poor kids never get the best treatment, the best food, the best teachers, the best equipment. And then people are wondering why you can't get world-class results. So I said, rather than treat the poor kids to the worst conditions, why don't we treat them to the best conditions and see what happens? So that's what we built. This is my concept of a school for poor people. This happens to be in the highest crime rate neighborhood in Pittsburgh, my neighborhood. We have a murder a month, every month, including last month. So our record is unblemished for murders, but not in my school. When you guys come to visit, and I hope I can round you up and you guys can come spend a day with us, what you will not see in this school is a metal detector or any security cameras. There are none, 0. And we're in the highest crime rate neighborhood. We've never had one incident in 26 years, 0. I got black kids and white kids and Hispanic kids all going to school together, and they get along fine. Why? Because environment drives behavior. Beautiful environments create beautiful kids. Prisons create prisoners. So rather than treat people like prisoners, I decided to treat them like human beings. And all of a sudden, we've got fantastic results from this school in the middle of a tough inner city neighborhood. Now, if you guys come to Pittsburgh, you'll fly into Greater Pittsburgh International Airport. My building was the scale model for the Pittsburgh Airport, so it's kind of famous in that respect. And it's in a tough inner city neighborhood. And, oh, it's all glass, by the way. We've never had a broken window, any graffiti, no theft, no drugs, no alcohol, not one police call in 26 years. That's the entrance to the building. Everywhere your eye turns in this school, there's something beautiful looking back at you. That's quite deliberate. It's also all my taste, because I raised all the money. I said with my board, when y'all raise the money, we'll put your taste on the wall. But we have quilts and clay and calligraphy, and everywhere your eye turns, there's something beautiful looking back at you. We have $200,000 in artwork, no anti-theft system on the art. We haven't lost a screwdriver in 26 years, nothing. Amish quilts and calligraphy and clay. That's our boardroom. I commissioned a Japanese cabinet maker to do 60 pieces of furniture for our school. We have his furniture all over our building. That's black walnut. And the reason we have it in the building, beautiful buildings create beautiful people. If you build these kind of centers, you get world-class results. And I hired this guy from Kyoto, Japan. A friend of mine went to Kyoto and married this guy and brought him to Pittsburgh and said, I understand you're teaching carpentry, which we did in the old days. And my husband's a woodworker. I was wondering if you'd give him a job. I said, well, bring the guy over. I'll talk to him. Well, he didn't speak any English. You can imagine how much Japanese I speak. But I found out he had studied with George Nakashima, who was one of the great Japanese-American woodworkers, and I was hip to Nakashima. I said, tell your husband I'm going to give him a job teaching carpentry. And she did in Japanese, and he stood up and he bowed. He said, please tell Mr. Strickland I'm really grateful for the job, but I apologize that my English is so poor. I said, well, tell your husband that the students he's going to work with don't speak English either, so they ought to get along fine. And I hired this guy, and we did 60 pieces of furniture for the school. He's off doing furniture for rich people. He's got a year waiting list in the industrial park, but we got this out of it for our school. We even have fresh flowers in the building every day, not plastic. I don't want to offend anybody, but I'm not promoting plastic flowers. I have never figured out the aesthetic contribution of plastic flowers to the world, but now that I'm getting to be a big shot, speaking at Bridgewater and this and that, we had a bunch of high school principals come over to my school. They said, man, Mr. Strickland, this place is fabulous. And we were really blown away by them flowers. We were curious how them flowers got there. I said, well, I got in my car and I went out to the greenhouse and I bought them and I brought them back and I put them there. You don't need a task force or a study group to buy flowers for your kids. The children deserve fresh flowers in their life. The cost is incidental, but the gesture is very significant. What I figured out is flowers and sunlight and food cures cancer of the spirit. That's why I won the MacArthur Genius Award. I figured out the cure for spiritual cancer. Oh, in my class was a fellow named Stephen Hawking. He did okay in the physics business. So Stephen Hawking, the greatest physicist since Albert Einstein, and me win the Genius Award. And I'm the kid who gets into the university on probation. Don't judge the book by the cover. You never know in what form your next genius is going to show up. We have a kitchen. I hope you eat Heinz ketchup in your hometown. If you don't, you ought to start. And if you do, you ought to eat more. I'm a big promoter of Heinz ketchup. Do you guys have Heinz ketchup in your school? Very good. That's nice to hear. The reason I promote Heinz ketchup is the Heinz ketchup company's in Pittsburgh, and Senator Heinz, who was our U.S. Senator, had heard about me wanting to build a school. So he called me into his office. I had a little scale model of my school, and he called me into his office, which was like going to see the Wizard of Oz, because he had about $600 million at the time, and I had about 60 cents. He said, man, you've done a great job with the black folks and the poor people, and we understand you want to build a new school. I said, yeah, I do. He said, well, you could really help the Heinz Company's affirmative action goals out if you'd add a culinary program, new school, when you get it built. That way we could hire some black folks and solve the problem. Well, we were a building trades program back then, remember? And I said, Senator, I'm really reluctant to go into a field I don't know anything about, but I promise you, man, give me the money, we'll build the school, and I'll come back in a couple years and we'll get that culinary program going just like you asked. And he sat real quietly. He said, well, what would your answer be if I said I'd give you $1 million? I said, Senator, it appears that we're going into the food training business. And John gave me $1 million, but as importantly, he loaned me to head of research for the Heinz Company, and we built $1 million kitchen for poor people. And we trained people for the food industry, big time. And it's worked out pretty good. Now, we lost John to a plane accident. I believe that he would have been handing the keys to President-elect Obama in the White House, but he didn't make it. But as sure as I'm standing at this podium, you'll feel his spirit at the front door of this building when you guys come to visit in Pittsburgh, which I hope you do. We built an amphitheater for the students. Now, we work with all the people that nobody wants to work with: welfare mothers, single parents, dropouts, homeless folks. All the people that nobody wants to work with are the students who come to my school deliberately. And the idea is, just because you grew up poor doesn't mean you have to remain that way. So this is the amphitheater we built for the students. We bring in chefs from all over the world who do product presentations at our school. That's our pastry department. That's one of our students. I took the design from a Ritz-Carlton hotel and I built it. So our guys are being trained to a Ritz-Carlton standard every day in the middle of a tough inner city neighborhood with a high crime rate, but not in my school. That's in celebration of a salmon I caught in Lake Michigan and brought back to Pittsburgh. I had this fish in these coolers. I'm thinking, what am I going to do with all this fish? Have a fish fry. So I did smoked salmon and salmon with gravlax and salmon with crab meat, 3 forks, 3 knives, ice sculpture, imported wines, and I did my version of a fish fry. And I invited 100 of my corporate buddies to this fish fry. One guy was so taken with the concept of the center, he gave us a check for $300,000. One salmon, $300,000. Calculate the return on investment for that one piece of salmon. So as you might suspect, we now do salmon presentations quite regularly at our school. This is lunch, guys, at the school. How many of you would like to go to a place that has lunch like that? Raise your hand. Okay, that solves that problem. This is what we eat for lunch every day. We discovered it's very difficult to teach people when they're hungry. So the answer is give them something to eat. But we don't do fast food, we do gourmet food. And if people tell you that you can't have gourmet food in a public school, you send them to Pittsburgh. I've been doing it for 25 years. You just have to want to do it bad enough. And there's no statistical difference between wealthy kids and poor kids when it comes to food. Food should be for everybody on the planet, not just rich kids. And I figured that out in the middle of my school. So that's lunch every day at our school. That's also lunch. That's all pastry. I actually sat down and ate a whole basket one time. It was very, no calories, of course, but a great demonstration of the power of the human spirit. This is what poor people are doing in 6 months in the middle of an inner city neighborhood in Pittsburgh with a high crime rate. So the moral of the story is, folks, we've made a fascinating discovery. The only thing that we can determine that's wrong with poor people is they don't have any money, which happens to be a curable condition. It's all in the way you think about people that drives behavior. This is lunch at my school in the middle of the inner city. If you guys come visit, we'll feed this to you at lunch. That's our dining room. This is where students eat lunch. This is my concept of what a dining room is supposed to look like. And we do the Medical Association, the Engineer Society. We do a lot of black tie functions at the school in the middle of the inner city. because I wanted to change the opinion of the inner city to that picture. We also train pharmaceutical technicians for the pharmacy industry. You come to Pittsburgh, I'll show you welfare moms doing pharmaceutical applications in 10 months with no background in science. And they're all going to work for the medical industry now, big time. I also train chemical technicians for the chemical industry. Bayer, Calgon Carbon, BASF, Alcoa. You come to Pittsburgh, I'll show you poor folks doing analytical chemistry using logarithmic calculators, as sure as I'm standing at this podium. What we've discovered is if you build a world-class facility, you get world-class performance. If you build a prison, you get prisoners. Now, why all the PhDs are running around with education degrees can't figure this out is a mystery to me. And it is not because of the teachers. The teachers are the good guys. What we have to do is to change the system. The system is the problem, not the teachers. Remember, I'm the kid whose life was saved by a public school teacher. That is why I'm committing myself to rebuilding public education in America, because my life was saved by a public school teacher with a conscience. One of our students. This is our library, more of our handcrafted furniture. This is the arts program. Remember, I'm the guy from the 60s making pottery? Well, this was during the riots, and guys were literally getting shot on the street in my neighborhood, and I wanted to help out. So the bishop of the Episcopal Diocese gave me some money. His name was Robert Appleyard, and he used to give me little checks out of the bishop's discretionary fund, and that's how I got Manchester started in a row house. I lived in a sleeping bag. I started bringing kids in off the street to teach them clay, and I started hearing back from the school system that the kids were starting to show up more regularly. After a couple years, I figured it out. There wasn't anything wrong with the kids. The kids were fine. They needed clay, they needed decent food, and somebody to believe in them. And you could figure this thing out. So nowadays, I graduated 95% of my kids last year, and we've averaged over 90% for 20 years in a row. Why? Because there's nothing wrong with the kids. That's why. We know how to take these children who are dropping out at the rate of 50%, and I got 100% of them, 95% of them graduating every year for the last 20 years. And I don't have a degree in education. I have a degree in common sense, which happens to be in very short supply in our country right now. So we do clay photography and digital imaging. This is our clay program. This is the kids' work. Now, artistic aptitude, whatever that is not a requirement to get into the program. Any kid that makes the mistake of scratching their head during the presentation is in the program. So get your mother to sign a piece of paper that says you can get on a school bus and you're good to go. We lose 20% of the kids when they discover it's not an adult daycare center. It's an arts program to save your life. And that's what kids about your age are doing in the middle of the inner city of Pittsburgh. I'm also getting guys 4-year scholarships right out of the workshops. This is all kids' work. These are the kids who supposedly don't have any ability. Well, they got plenty of ability. But you have to give them the tools so they can show you what they're capable of. This is the mosaic workshop we did with the kids. This is the piece the kids did for the school. It's all clay. And this piece. This is the pathway at the school. I've asked this question 1,000 times. Why can't kids have a chance to build a pathway to their school that looks just like this? And nobody's given me a good reason why you can't do it. We do photography. The kid who took that picture is now working for Walt Disney Studios, right out of our center. This is the gallery. This is the student show. This is our concept of how to treat the artwork of inner city kids. There's a museum quality invitation. We have smoked salmon at the art openings. And so the kids are eating smoked salmon. They got a great invitation. It looks just like the Museum of Modern Art. I even got their parents coming to these things. In the old days, we couldn't get any parents to show up. The kids would work real hard, and they'd do the work, and none of their parents would show up. So the kids got real teary, so I got tired of looking at that. So I hired a guy. One of my buddies got off into saving souls for the Lord, you know, dragging guys out of bars with a Bible and all that kind of stuff. I said, I want you to come work for me. You got to tone down the Jesus stuff a little bit, but keep the enthusiasm, man. I can't get the parents to come. He said, I'll get him to come. So I took the keys to the van and went to Miss Jones's house. I said, Miss Jones, I knew you wanted to come to your kid's art opening, but you probably didn't have a ride. So I came to give you a ride. We got 10 parents and 20 parents. The last show, 200 parents. And we didn't pick up one parent. You know why? Now it's not cool not to show up and support your kids at the Manchester Craftsman's Guild art opening, or people think you're a lousy parent. There's no statistical difference between white mothers and black mothers and Asian mothers and Hispanic mothers. Mothers will go where their kids are being nurtured every day of the week. So we got that problem figured out. This is actually an old slide. You know, before I got real fancy with my little PowerPoint, I actually had slides in a box with duct tape on the corner of the box and a slide projector. And I got called out to a place called the Silicon Valley. So I showed up with my slide projector. These people looked at me like I was from Pluto, man. But that's cool. I blew off the dust, plugged in a little slide projector, told them a story. And this lady came out of the audience. She said, man, what a story. My only criticism is your computers are getting a little bit old. Well, I ain't no high-tech guy. They all look about the same to me. I said, well, what do you do for a living? She said, oh, I run a company called Hewlett-Packard. I said, well, my dear, there's an instantaneous solution to this problem. And long and short of it is we've got $1 million from HP and the systems engineer to go with it. And we now have one of the hippest digital imaging centers east of the Mississippi River. And I'm putting kids into the Rhode Island School of Design right out of the imaging center. But I keep this slide in here for nostalgia reasons, and you never know when an Apple representative might be in the audience. This is what HP built. This is called a classroom. This is how you learn technology. And by the way, these kids are learning this technology big time. I also built a music hall. And I'm very glad I did because a very famous trumpet player, I'm not sure you guys would know, but some of these guys would know. His name was Dizzy Gillespie. He's very famous. And Dizzy Gillespie showed up at my center. And I said, why'd you come here? He said, oh, man, Billy Taylor told me a black guy built this beautiful facility, and I didn't believe one see for myself. And you're too young to appreciate what you built, but you ought to build one of these centers in every city in this country, and I'm going to help you do it. I said, well, you came here. That's enough. He said, no, I'm going to allow you to record the concert. I'm going to give you the rights to the music, which he did. And then a very famous piano player named Herbie Hancock showed up. And then Wynton Marsalis, and then Wynton Marsalis, his father, Ellis Marsalis, then Shirley Horn, and Betty Carter, and Nancy Wilson, and Dakota Staton, a guy named Pat Metheny, guitar player. So we now have 600 recordings. And have y'all ever heard of something called the Grammy Awards? Well, we won 6 Grammys. So we have $1 million recording studio in my center in Pittsburgh. If you guys come, I'll play you some music. It's turned out to be one of the best jazz recording labels in America in my school. So we have now the longest running jazz subscription series in the United States of America in the middle of the inner city of Pittsburgh in a black neighborhood that everybody gave up on for dead. So it's worked out pretty good. That's the place all filled up with rich people on opening night. If you'd have dropped a bomb in that room, it'd have wiped out all the rich people in Pennsylvania because they're all sitting there, including my mom and dad. They're in the third row. They're both now deceased, but they lived long enough to see their kid build this center in the neighborhood and open it up black tie. The next night I had the neighborhood come in, had the same food both nights. Why? I wanted to establish the principle that you don't have to own a tuxedo to be treated like somebody wearing one. And I knew that people start talking about that. So we now sell all of our concerts in subscription 3 weeks after the season's announced in the middle of the inner city of Pittsburgh. And we've never had one act of vandalism in 22 years. There's Dizzy, just in case you thought I was lying, he was there. That's Billy Taylor and Jerry Mulligan. That's Pat Metheny and Jim Hall. Y'all heard of a fellow named Paul Simon? Well, his engineers designed that acoustically perfect recording studio for free. So we have one of the best digital recording studios in America. And Nancy Wilson did back-to-back Grammys with us. And these are all kids from the public school system. When they reach third grade, we bring every third grader from the Pittsburgh Public Schools over to our center for music. We don't call it jazz, we just call it music. And the kids are usually pretty crazy, as third graders tend to be. And they're all wild and they got all this energy until our band breaks into their interpretation of the Flintstones. And all of a sudden, it becomes like this fabulous concert. And the kids love the music. And they settle down and they're excited. The only problem is they got to go back to school. So they go from excited to depressed. So I'm building a new concept. Why don't we start building schools that kids are so excited to go to, you can teach them something. If they're excited to come to my place, they ought to be excited to go to every school. And I want jazz to be a part of every school curriculum in the United States of America, and I'm not going to give up till I get my way, because this music is very important for these children. These people need to know who Sarah Vaughan and Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald were, and all the trouble they went to preserve this music. This was burned out during the riots. Just in case you thought I was living in the fancy part of Pittsburgh, this is next to the building I've been showing you. So I had another cardboard box built. I built that building. This has won architectural awards. This is really a commercial office building next to our campus. And there's the fountain. The University of Pittsburgh Medical Center took the 3rd and 4th floors for that building. We make money, and there's the entrance to the building. This is my version of how to build buildings for people. Every building is beautiful, or I won't build it. People need to go to beautiful surroundings. Oh, I also built a greenhouse. I grow orchids, and the orchids have worked out pretty good. We sell them in the grocery stores, Whole Foods and these guys. So we generate money from the orchids to subsidize the school, because everything I've shown you tonight is free. There's no tuition for the school. So everybody that comes here can actually go here for nothing. So we raise the money to provide a tuition-free education, and the orchids have gotten us to be pretty famous in Pittsburgh. So I got poor welfare moms growing orchids. Good for their spirits, good for the pocketbooks of the school. Those orchids. We won 1st and 2nd prize in the orchid symposium, so now all the orchid ladies meet at my place in the middle of the inner city of Pittsburgh. Those orchids. Now, this is all being done by inner city people who supposedly don't have any ability. Well, they got plenty of ability. And now I'm down to the end of the story. This is where the story takes another interesting turn. You remember I was out there at the Silicon Valley with my little slideshow? Well, this young man came out of the audience and he said, wow, what a story. I said, cool, man, what do you do for a living? He said, oh, I built a company called eBay. I said, oh, great, man, you got a card? Remember, I ain't the techie guy. I didn't know what eBay was. So I put the kid's card in my pocket. I went back to Pittsburgh and asked one of the little techie kids, I said, have you ever heard of something called eBay? He said, oh, yeah, Mr. Strickland, that's the Electronic Commerce Network. I said, holy smokes, I met the guy that built the company. So I called him up. I said, Mr. Skull, I've come to have a much deeper appreciation of who you are, man. And he started laughing. He said, I thought you'd figure it out sooner or later. Here's $500,000. I said, what's that for? He says, your first replication. Against all probability, Jeff Skull has become one of my closest friends. The kid's got $5.5 billion. He's 44 years old. He's a type A just like me. And he wants to build centers just like me. And I said, why are you messing around with me? You got $5 billion. What do you need with a black guy from Pittsburgh for with one program? He says, I think you're eBay. I think your idea is scalable. Then we're going to see. So, guys, I'm building centers now in cities. We got 4 of them open. Cleveland, Cincinnati, Grand Rapids, and Frisco. There's the space in Frisco before it was fixed up. There's Mr. eBay, Jeff Skull, Billy Wong, and the kids are doing film and digital imaging with George Lucas Studios. This is the environment for the kids. This is what the school looks like. Those kids. Those kids are not failures. Those kids are successes. And they're all doing fine. This is the one we opened up in Cincinnati. We cut the dropout rate to 5% in Cincinnati in 24 months. And I don't live in Cincinnati. I live in Pittsburgh. It's the environment. There's the building. There's the gallery. Every building that we build for kids is beautiful. This is digital imaging. These kids turn this into a business. They get $11,000 every time they do a mural around Cincinnati, so they turn it into a little company. This is the one we opened up in Grand Rapids. The guy that built this one died about 4 years ago from leukemia. And he said, I want you to remember me by telling people that the 2 things I was proudest of, my family and building a center for people with no hope in downtown Grand Rapids. His name was Jim Welsh, and he was a good guy. And this is what we built. This is the facility that we built for the kids. Those are photographs, by the way, of Dr. King taken during the last 2 years of his life until he was killed. That's the dining room for the kids. How many of you would like to have a dining room like that in your school? Okay, that answers that. Well, maybe we'll figure out a way to build you one before this is all over. Called Western Michigan Center for Arts and Technology. Oh, we cut the dropout rate in Grand Rapids to 5%. There's the gallery. These kids are doing film and video. And these kids are in the program. One of the ways that we now know that the program is taking effect on the kids, they start pulling their pants up. And then when they put a belt on, I know I got them. These used to be called welfare mothers. You know what they're called now? Pharmaceutical technicians. They're not welfare mothers. Welfare is a state of mind. These guys are working for the DeVos medical system. They're out of poverty and they ain't coming back. This is the one we just opened up in Cleveland. These are the kids. We had a waiting list for this center before we opened the doors. And we saw kids get off the school bus for the first time and walked away from this building because they couldn't conceive that this building was for them. They thought they got off at the wrong stop. We're doing film with the kids. This guy does recordings with a woman named Alicia Keys. And this is the medical program. They're the students, the first group of students, and that's the facility we built for them. This is the one we're opening up in New Haven, Connecticut, April 12. So if you're walking the streets with nothing to do, come to the opening in New Haven. But that's what the building's going to look like. This is my idea of what a school's supposed to look like for kids. This is the one we're planning for Boston. So we're pretty close. We're going to get this one built, we think, in the next year, and we're pretty excited about it. The governor's aware of this. I met Governor Patrick's folks, and they're very excited about this. New Haven and Boston. Austin, Buffalo, and Brockway, Pennsylvania. Reno, Richmond, St. Petersburg, Allentown, Atlanta, and U.S. Virgin Islands. And we have 3 international ones, Halifax, Vancouver, and Northern Israel. And probably by the end of June, we're going to build one in Japan for the survivors of the tsunami. And I have a bill I'm trying to get passed in Congress to fund these centers all over the country. And we've got Senator Kerry and a few other people who are signed up for this thing. We may pull this off. And then finally, I have a book out called Make the Impossible Possible that tells this whole story in a book. The book's doing pretty well. It's over 60,000 sold. And a lot of colleges are using the book for a freshman reader. But I gave this little talk to a bunch of middle and elementary school students 3 weeks ago in Canton, Ohio. And 3 fourth graders came out of the audience up to the podium, and they said, "We want to create hope in the world just like you do." And one little girl had $6 in her hand, all crunched up. And she gave me the $6, and she said, "I want to help your center, Mr. Strickland." And I said to her mother, "I can't take these $6. She said, "Oh, you have to." She's determined that she's going to help your school. So we took the $6. We're going to write her a big letter thanking her. But this was a 3rd grader. That's why I do this work. Because you never know what life you're going to affect by this story. Now, when I walked into that school, they had quotes from my book all over the school. And 3rd and 4th graders related to this story. I didn't think they'd get it. They got it all right. And then on the way out, there was a little 2nd grader. She's about that big. She had a little piece of paper all crumpled up. She wanted my autograph. So I signed this little piece of paper for this young girl who wanted my autograph. So what I want to do in the world is build schools like this in the U.S. and around the world. And I'm hoping by coming up here, I can recruit some of you guys to help me because we're behind. We're losing our country. You know, the dropout rate now is 50% for Hispanic and African American kids. We'll never make it, guys. And I'm betting my life that some of you care about your country and that you know right from wrong and that you want to do something about it. And so I keep telling this story over and over and over until we get enough people lined up to save this country. I was with the President of the United States, President Obama, last year at the White House. And I was appointed to a commission to work on education with kids. And I saw this, I was in the Oval Office, which is oval, by the way. And the President came in, I said, I'm Barack Obama, nice to meet you, Mr. Strickland. Thank you for being willing to help your country relative to its kids. And they had a guest list of all the big shots on this commission. I knew some of them, but there was one guy, it said John Bon Jovi, artist. I said, I wonder what he's into. So I go back to Pittsburgh, and one of my kids said, well, how was the White House, Dad? I said, oh, it was cool. The lamb chops are pretty good. I highly recommend them if you ever go to the place. The President's a great guy. Have you ever heard of somebody named John Bon Jovi? She said, oh, Dad, I hope you didn't tell the President you didn't know the guy. I said, no, I kept my mouth shut. I got enough sense to do that. What's he into? Well, I found out what he's into. And wouldn't you know that I got lucky again, man. A couple years ago, John Bon Jovi's chief of staff had saw this slideshow. And she told him about the slideshow. He says, well, if I ever go to play Pittsburgh, I'll go check him out. Guess what? That was 3 months ago. So this big black limousine drives up in front of the school, and John Bon Jovi gets out. And he said, you're the guy on the President's Commission. I said, yeah, I just figured out who you are too, man. Thanks for coming. So I ended up getting tickets to the concert backstage. If you guys come, I'll show you the pictures. And he signed a T-shirt for every kid in the program. So every kid's got an original John Bon Jovi T-shirt. And he wants to help rebuild the world with me. So we've now become very close friends. And he's the real deal, man. So we're going to keep going until we get this right. And I'll finally end with this story. I got an award in Japan, something called the GOI Peace Award. So I show up in Japan to meet the children who survived the tsunami. You remember about the tsunami in Japan? Well, I was there, man, about 3 months ago. Whole towns were washed out to sea. I saw a freighter sitting in the middle of a cornfield. The garbage, by the way, is 30 feet in the air today. And I went into a home, this fisherman with garbage in his backyard 10 feet high, right up to his back door. And this book I was telling you guys about, it's now been translated into Japanese. So I go into this home, we sit on the floor, he's got no heat, and a young man who had just quit Sony to devote his life to rebuilding this village handed me my book. He said, would you please sign this for us? We think this is the road back. So they took me down to the school with the principal. All the windows are blown out. The desks are overturned. You could see homework papers in the mud. And the principal said, when the first wave broke, it was 7 feet high. And rather than go to the roof of the school, I thought there's going to be a second wave. So he rounded up all 80 kids, and they went up into the hills behind the school in the wintertime with no heat, no food, no tents, no winter clothing. And he saved 80 children. They came out of the mountains to find out that many of their parents had been washed out to sea. So we formed a prayer circle in front of that school, and we prayed for the souls of those people who were lost. And it was very, very difficult to see that. So I'm on the way back to Tokyo in this train with the people who had brought me there, Mr. and Mrs. Saonji. And I was very quiet, and they said, what are you quiet about? You look very troubled. And I said, I am troubled. I've never learned how to ignore human suffering. We got to do something for these kids, man. He said, well, my wife and I got down on our knees and prayed to God last night that you would reach that conclusion. He said, what do we have to do first? I said, you have to come to Pittsburgh to see the school first. Well, they're coming in June. June 20th, they'll be in Pittsburgh. And then I finally turned to them, I said, by the way, who are you guys? I don't even know who you are. I came here because of this award. They said, well, Mr. Zonzi said, well, the last 10 emperors of Japan were my direct descendants. I'm in the dynastic line of emperors in Japan. And his wife's father donated the cherry blossoms to Washington, D.C. That's who I was sitting with. They're the first family of Japan, and they promised that I would have an audience with the prince and princess in the royal palace when we go back to tell this story about building a center for the survivors of the tsunami. So I'm going to play out this hand, guys. I have no intentions of changing my mind. And we're going to try to build as many schools as often as possible where they're needed. And I'm hoping that maybe because of this presentation, I've made some friends who will join me in this cause. And thank you for being so polite and listening to my little presentation tonight. And thank you for the invitation to speak.